All right. Okay, super. So here's the deal today. What we're talking about is setting up your Zendrum to match what you're attempting to play. Naturally speaking, when it comes to your sounds and your setups, I tend to err on the side of setting up only what is necessary for the song, trying to keep it simple. That means, to me, I would rather have some custom things that fit the songs that I'm playing. If there's a fill that I need to play on that setup, then I actually have the ability to have a custom layout on that setup so I could do something that makes sense with my hands. Typically speaking, normal setups are not that tricky. I mean, I have, just for instance, just got open hi-hat and bass drum, snare drum, and when I rotate my hand, that's pretty standard. I'm not working real hard. Also, if I just change one finger position, I can play with the China. And then, again, not working too hard. And then what I usually set up is a bass drum in a central location that allows me to access cymbals for hits, some like standalone hits that you may have inside of your tunes that you're playing. So what I've got here is the bass drum in a central location, and it's flanked on all sides by 6 cymbals. You already saw the China, and then we'll just move our way across. I've got them set up so they make sense in a logical pitch progression, but because my bass drum is in a central location, okay. So not only does that make sense for me from a playing standpoint, but it allows me the comfort of knowing that all I have to do is change my bass drum if I want a little bit tighter of a drum. Then I've got but it's all in the same place. It's all where it's supposed to be. One thing I've done is set myself up for some pretty complex tom fills on this particular setup. This is a stock laptop. This is one of the first ones we ever made, in fact, or the first one ever made. You may think backwards from me, but if you have tendencies that I do to drum on steering wheels and basically drum, I've been drumming forever, so I basically drum on everything I can get my hands on. I have the tendency to probably impatiently do this little finger roll here. If you can just imagine, okay, just imagine your fingers as strikes on the drum. And what I've done is I've set up 2 toms per trigger up top, so I can get myself a nice long fill going. Okay, so and then what I would do would be filling in with the bass drum in between, so I could, okay, or I can use all 4 fingers up top with my bass drum support hand and so this is just a way that something natural that we do as human beings can set up for a very nice layout. This is something that where the drums fit us instead of us trying to accommodate for the drums. Sometimes this is where I like to tell people it's kind of the zen of the thing. When I tell you that your setup is completely unique to you, and that if something isn't working for you, but maybe while you're playing, the setup that we stock send you while you're playing that, maybe you have a finger that instinctually reaches up here when you think you ought to be hitting that crash symbol. Well, put that crash symbol underneath your finger. Don't fight the instinct in this regard. When it comes to playing, especially getting comfortable with an instrument like this, the only way that you're going to effectively help yourself out is by taking that instinct and working with it. When it comes to that, I tend to look at this laptop as a steering wheel, and when it comes convenient to me, I can fit notes under my fingers. Now I can change some things here and make some other sounds, do some other things. But this is a pretty stock kind of layout, especially if I want to play some metal or something, metal, rock and roll, whatever. Bust out your big toms and go to town. But when I'm actually talking about doing some real open tom sounding kind of things, it's just nice to know that something I'm comfortable with is what it takes to make that sound. And all I've got to do is roll my fingers across 4 triggers in a very natural manner. And now as a guitar player, on top of everything else, growing up playing all kinds of stuff, but a big influence of mine has always been Eddie Van Halen. And so I think when it came time to dig into Zendrum, I took something that applied to the guitar, which is finger tapping, and I always thought of finger tap because I was a drummer first. I always thought of finger tapping as percussion anyway, and so at that point I start thinking about this coming full circle, and so I've actually got something I can think about like a fretboard and run my fingers down and back up, just like I was finger tapping and playing something crazy, Van Halen style. So this is just association for me. Every player's got their own type of association that they need to be wary of. But when it comes down to setup for a specific song or a fill that you need, that you're just looking for something to fit the proper fit for a space. Not only do we have to worry about accommodating the drums and playing around our drums, but with the Zendrum, we can manipulate those drums in a way that accommodates us. And I want everybody to think about that when you go to program. Think about your need on any particular setup. You can have a bunch of them. You can have 16 setups on these boards. So think about your individual needs. If you're playing a excuse me, if you're playing a show, like maybe you're just playing kind of a power set and you're doing 10 songs and getting off stage, you can just rotate through your setup. Setup number 1, can be your first song. 2 is the second song, and all you have to do is rotate through your setups using your cursor pad. You can just set up each individual song, and that if you've done the work ahead of time, then it's going to be there when you need it. Other than that, you could, plenty of people do, just set up their Zendrum one time, and then every setup is the same setup with maybe just a different snare or a different bass drum. I like having all the access to a lot of cymbals, and I know I can do a lot more up here with more cymbals, even if I consolidated my toms maybe to 4. But as of right now, I really enjoy this setup because it gives me the flexibility to play way too big epic tom fills. But it's about making the Zendrum fit us as players. The same kind of concept as the first time you buy that big expensive drum kit and you sit down behind it and you understand that you have to set it up in a way that you can replicate to fit you. You have to be able to hit every drum comfortably. You have to be able to sit behind it sometimes for hours at a time. And that is no different than Zendrum. I have to be able to sit here sometime for hours at a time and play a set. Or I have to be able to know that there are certain things under my fingers that I don't necessarily need to have to work so hard for. If I wanted to play some difficult passages in tunes, I want to know that the Zendrum is there for me, doing some of the work, and like Dave always says, taking the sweat equity out of it. So we're talking about putting the notes under your fingers where your fingers instinctually go. And that's what this little lesson was about. Think outside the box. Get comfortable. We really talk a lot about sitting down with your instrument and wood shedding. You really need to put in the time. I mean, it's the same thing as putting in the time with your drum set. Getting that clarity of you just know that this cymbal is right here under your stick every time. Or if I relax my elbow, that's my floor time every time. So it's all about being comfortable, and that is no different with the Zendrum. Get in there, do the work. I promise you, the Zendrum will respond to you in exactly the same way that practicing any instrument will respond to you. You will get better. You will learn where things are supposed to be. And then and that will also kick off your creative brain to think about how maybe I can move this over here and I can make a completely different sound. Or maybe I can use a few triggers, and if I wanted to do a triplet pattern, I can. But it's all about kind of thinking outside the box and understanding that sometimes you got to put the notes under your fingers where your fingers already want to go. It's a natural thing that we're trying for here. Drumming's cool. I like it. I just like to make it easy. I have my normal bass drums that I use as my right side typically is my dominant side, and this is usually my support side. I'm usually assisting myself with this side. So when I do just a regular stock kind of beat, so I use my left hand as filler stuff that accentuates the actual steady beat. It's all about convenience. when I think about a setup, I think about, as a drummer, as someone who grew up playing behind a set, I think about what my body would like to normally do behind a Zen drum as well. So because of the natural rhythm that comes when you start working behind a drum set, you get your whole body wrapped up in the rhythm of the thing. I like to think about that as well. I like to get my up to my elbows involved when it comes down to time to play, especially just like rocking a standard beat. I like to it's just something that incorporates the fluidity that comes with, naturally being behind a drum set. When I get moving too, my body is affecting my rhythm of my playing. So that natural kind of bounce that you develop behind a drum kit, you get that here, and you get it in a real natural way. You just get it with 10 drumsticks. So that's kind of the lesson to be learned here is sometimes instead of adapting yourself to the drum set, you have to adapt the drum set to you. And in that regard, what I've done is set myself up for some pretty epic tom fills. So I've got 2 triggers here, both with bass drum sounds. And what I like to do is run toms across the top. So when it goes to make time to make a tom fill, I can make a bigger tom fill, probably play it cleaner here than I can on a drum set. I don't have to worry about rims, and I don't have to worry about, maybe playing on the house kit and things aren't where I need it to be. So, but I do this. So if I want to get in there and do it fast, you wind up with something like this. Sorry about the cymbal in there. Okay. That's my epic tom fill.